As an airline, how do you balance inbound and outbound, which is always a key challenge for this industry?
Looking at the difficulties, strategically, it works hand in hand with passenger demand, inbound, outbound, code shares, your reliance on other airlines within intra-Africa.
Just like what I mentioned at the introduction earlier on, last year, the entire Hong Kong International Airport handled 4.9 million tons of cargo. That represented a 14% year-on-year growth. Now, of course, a lot of what was driving it was certainly e-commerce, and many people would have heard me saying that in many of the industry conferences. Yes, I think in January we saw a continuing robust growth.
So Swissport is in all the continents. So if I look at growth, 2024, there's quite a bit of growth in all the markets. And could be even geographical expansion, starting of cargo handling in Asia Pacific.
Particularly for Peter, what do you think about using ACMI as a temporary capacity fix for African airlines?
Certainly, that's in fact option number one. For airlines, before you go full throttle investment, it's always the workable model.
I want to ask something about sustainability and climate change. What are your agencies or organizations doing about sustainability and climate change? We know
it's a hot topic. When we look at ESG, let me just expound it a bit more.
Yeah, so the nature of e-commerce is shifting, and that's actually going to change the type of aircraft that are needed to serve this market compared to what we've seen historically. So in particular, over the last 2 years, there have been two key developments in e-commerce. The first is the emergence of a direct-to-consumer model.
What's behind that, and how do you see that benefiting the cargo community?
Yeah, it's a little bit of what I said earlier in the panel, where we can't fly everywhere where we need to be. It's too expensive, there's a lack of capital, it takes time, so partnerships are a much more efficient, faster way to serve a market. We are looking at partnerships more and more across the globe, including in Africa with Rwanda Air and Airlink, as you mentioned.
Excellent. Now, Wilson, I'm actually the question is very much related to that, because we talk about e-commerce, we talk about Hong Kong, we talk about freighters. I had the privilege of coming to a tour at your facility last year. Just phenomenal. And I'll let you announce the number to the audience because it's staggering, the number of freighters that you handled in one day. But as Peter said, something happened, Chinese New Year. There's also now a challenge for a certain country in this world that wants to kind of suppress e-commerce. I was going to do an impression there, but don't do any impressions. No impressions, I was told. Don't do any impressions, but I was going to. Now, do you think that some e-commerce that maybe not be going to the US might actually be redirected here, that the major platforms might actually start looking, say, how can we expand and again exploit this youth? Does it mean that the freighter capacity perhaps might be redeployed to this region? What's your thoughts on?
Sure. Thank you. Just like what I mentioned at the introduction earlier on, last year, the entire Hong Kong International Airport handled 4.9 million tons of cargo. That represented a 14% year-on-year growth. Now, of course, a lot of what was driving it was certainly e-commerce, and many people would have heard me saying that in many of the industry conferences. Yes, I think in January we saw a continuing robust growth. The e-commerce activities still continued. Partly they may be front-loading activities, and then we saw the policy shifts, which have an impact, but it also coincided with the Chinese New Year. So while on one hand it helped with your flower trade, it also means that it's very difficult for us to compare the year-on-year numbers, because there is a combined effect of what's happening with the additional tariff, the changes in the de minimis rule, as well as the Chinese New Year. So, we will have more clarity, I think, over the next weeks or so, I think on that. But yes, e-commerce is definitely a major growth. Will that continue? I think we all just have to ask ourselves, is the e-commerce phenomena going to change? Will we continue to buy things? And I always quote your daughter's example, Glyn. I think that's always a wonderful example. And when you buy something online, do you want it tomorrow or do you want it in 3 weeks' time? I think the answers to those questions are actually quite clear. And I'm therefore actually very confident about the growth of e-commerce. Yes, there will always be uncertainties when it comes to policies. And yes, there will always be uncertainties over the trailing changes and mix. But I think on the overall, I think the e-commerce growth will continue. Now, as to whether that will free up some capacity, from the e-commerce side to, let's say, the others or to the other continents, I think one thing which the air cargo community internationally is very good with is being agile with our operations. We always find the opportunities and we will always serve the markets. So I think on that note, I'm actually very bullish about the activities going into 2025. There will be uncertainties, but overall we will see growth.
Excellent, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, Grant, I'm actually going to take one of the words that Wilson just used there, which is agile. Because you spoke earlier today about the excitement of almost doing weekly, almost daily, looking at where the opportunities are. You serve some of the key gateways here. You talk about secondary airports and secondary markets. As an airline, how do you balance inbound and outbound, which is always a key challenge for this industry?
Looking at the difficulties, strategically, it works hand in hand with passenger demand, inbound, outbound, code shares, your reliance on other airlines within intra-Africa. With Etihad, we do a slow expansion. As we take on more aircrafts and have more metal, we've slowly started to look at the industries and see where the vital points are for us to pick up. Recently, we started flying to Kenya, into Nairobi, and we maintain our freight into Johannesburg, which services Nairobi going up. But the announcement of Tunisia, Algiers now coming on board. From August, we start flying daily into Johannesburg. We start flying daily into Morocco. So we're starting to expand slightly into Africa. Now, when it comes to the inbound demand, there is a need for e-commerce into Africa. And I, for one, I want my package in one day.
Yeah.
Facts. The problem is if you order on Temu, you don't know what you're getting and if it's worthwhile, but it's good. Now, inbound demand in that there's a need for inbound, obviously, because we're not a manufacturing nation. We need that stuff coming from the Far East, and they're a superpower when it comes to it. So that demand will always be there. Now, the outbound demand, I've always felt cargo is a relationship game, right? Very old school. I remember when I started in cargo 20 years ago, you used to write on a piece of paper, this is the rate, there we go. And you used to have that tap book. Now, building that sort of relationship always brings me back to the industry of, the seasonal flows of every African country. If you've experienced enough years in this continent, you know exactly what happens. The rains happen, Peter says, and you pull your freighter out. Fact. On a relationship standpoint, do we make the customer suffer because of that? That's a juggle. And this is where you build up your inbound and your outbound flow. Now, because of the heavy amount of capacity flying into the Far East and it coming west, airlines now look at leveraging the stuff that goes back into the East, because now we're just pumping freighters and capacity into the Far East. When does that bubble pop? What will the airline do next? How does it infringe? If iPhone comes tomorrow and says, sorry, we're only going to produce an iPhone every 2 years, what does that do to Vietnam? What does that do to India? What happens? So you constantly need to think to yourself, how is it going to influence my continent, my UAE? So where do we find those niche pockets? How quickly do we adapt and how agile are we? And this is how Etihad focuses. And I hope other airlines down the road do the same.
That's a good point. And, when I started in this industry, just before electricity and just after the Wright brothers did their first flight, people are looking saying, yeah, I get it, about then. But when I joined in the early 80s, it's 42 years ago, we used to fly around software in a box. When Microsoft were releasing a new version of Windows, there would be hundreds of millions of these, like 2.2 kilo, because they had to produce the handbook, the guide, in 40 different languages. Wonderful. Then some smart young kid, probably 12 years old, said, no, let's just press a button and download without moving anything via air cargo. So to your point, we lost that entire market. We lost desktop computers. We lost domestic printers. You know, so as an industry, you're quite right. You've got to keep looking and reinventing yourselves. Which then brings me on to Racheal. You know, if I'm not mistaken, you've got over 30 stations across the continent. Where are you seeing growth? How are you responding to, as Grant was saying, looking at changes in that mix of cargo? You know, investing in facilities, etc., not just for tomorrow, but for the next 3, 5, 10 years. How do you balance all that?
In terms of growth, I probably would look at it that I think it's in different markets. So Swissport is in all the continents. So if I look at growth, 2024, there's quite a bit of growth in all the markets. And could be even geographical expansion, starting of cargo handling in Asia Pacific, expanding in the US. But closer home, this continent, Africa, is very important. And why do I say that? I look at how much of investment we've done in the last 5 years, where we are present, where we have warehouses, state-of-the-art warehouses that are built not for today, but for the future. When Peter was talking about Valentine, it brought into memories of what we had to go through the last couple of weeks. Interesting enough, the permits came in very late in the day. So the confirmations happen a minute to midnight. And you need to be able to handle additional capacity up to 50% in a very short notice. So the investment is today, not tomorrow. Ready for any, being agile enough to be able to handle any volumes that come your way. So that's how intentional that we have been in this market. And again, when I talk about being intentional, is investing in innovative solutions for this market. Look at the flower corridor that we have here in Nairobi and now extended to Liège and Amsterdam. It's thinking about the customer and the customer's customer. We want to make sure that we are investing in solutions that offer the best product at destination. So it's as you said, it's investing now, being agile enough, and being very, very intentional about it. I'll go back to the people as well. It's investing in our people as well. How do we invest in our people, our talent, that we're able to retain them? That when all these opportunities that we're talking about come on board, that we have the resources to be able to support the opportunities.
Excellent. And I think to your point there, you have to invest for the peaks. And I think that's crucial because, as you say, your customers who are on the stage, they don't want to hear from you, I'm sorry, we're full. So I think that's very crucial. I've got more questions, but I want to pause in case there's anything that somebody in the audience has a crucial question that they're just itching to ask one of our panelists.
All right. First of all, a round of applause for all of them. I think they've done an amazing
we're not finished. We're not finished.
No, I'm putting on a question. Not yet.
No, I get paid for the word.
Hi there, it's Andrew Lester from Chapman Freeborn. A lot of the discussions go around capacity. Now, we've got our colleague from Boeing here that can reinforce that 80% of the inter-Africa cargo is moved by foreign operators. Now, that was released at the Africa Aviation Summit in Joburg a couple of months ago. Now, in terms of capacity, while we all want to own aircraft, there are aircraft available for ACMI, which is a very good solution for short-term periods. Now, particularly for Peter, what do you think about using ACMI as a temporary capacity fix for African airlines?
Great question. Peter, your thoughts on using ACMI?
Certainly, that's in fact option number one. For airlines, before you go full throttle investment, it's always the workable model. Works like a proof of concept of your operations before you take the huge jump into heavy investments in aircrafts. So we are, Kenya Airways actually, we have one ACMI aircraft. We've also, we are leasing the two 737-800 freighters on dry lease, not wet lease. But this is really the model that we're looking at. And even for a wide body project, I believe we've had numerous discussions with a number of lessors, etc., who can offer us these kind of solutions. Yeah.
Great, thanks for the question. Any young gentleman at the back?
Please feel free to introduce yourself so that we can.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Abara Karan. Thank you so much, the panelists, for the discussions ongoing. I want to ask something about sustainability and climate change. What are your agencies or organizations doing about sustainability and climate change? We know the world is our home, you know, and what are we doing in terms of cargo shipment, in terms of logistics within your operations that touches on climate change? Thank you.
Does anybody particularly want to take that, or?
I think it's a hot topic. When we look at ESG, let me just expound it a bit more. I think ESG is a hot topic. And in today's business, we have to think about being sustainable. We have to think about the future. And the way we look at it, my organization, it's the 1%, the 2% that you can do in order to contribute into that. Just to give you an example, we're in the tropics. Look at the weather. And how can we harness the solar to be able to run our operations? And that's what we've done. If you come, I know Swissport, but I've also seen other buildings at the airport. We use solar for 40% of our power production usage. And as I said, it's a small 1%, 2% in the warehouse use of electrical equipment. The warehouse, 100% electric. The equipment, 100%, and that's our 1-2% contribution to this big topic. But it's bigger than that. I think it's your own initiative. And I keep telling the team, it's when you walk out of a room, do we switch off that light? Do we recycle the paper? Do we need to print that paper? Let's break it down. Don't make it too big. Let's keep it to what you as an individual can do. And that's how we contribute as an organization.
And if I can add something extra from that is, as we know, the airline or the aviation industry has committed to a net zero target of 2050, of which about 65% is going to be based on the use of sustainable aviation fuel. And I have to say that the African states as a bloc were very vocal at an ICAO event that was held in Dubai last year about committing to interim targets to achieve that. But what the African bloc actually said is, we need help. We need help for the technology to produce the sustainable aviation fuel in the continent. It's no good producing it in just California and France and Singapore, for example, and then somehow trying to tanker it here. It needs to be produced here based on what we've already talked about, agricultural waste, agricultural byproducts. As we can enhance the manufacturing sector, it also creates byproducts which can then actually go through one of 120 pathways to create sustainable aviation fuel. So the environmental aspects should be another opportunity for Africa to really stand out amongst the global community as a leading player in this area. So another area I think there's huge opportunity going forward. Great. Well, we've got 10 minutes. I got another round of questions I'd like to kind of bring in. Aaron, we've talked, as we thought would, e-commerce has come up quite a lot. And thanks to Grant, Grant's going to do more daily purchases, etc. Wilson's mentioned my daughter. I don't have to. Normally I would mention my daughter and her e-commerce profile and stuff, and the fact that she can generate 10,000 shipments just by promoting one product online. But what's your thoughts on e-commerce? What's the fleet that's going to be needed? The aircraft you mentioned, you know, there are different aircraft that are more e-commerce friendly. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the nature of e-commerce is shifting, and that's actually going to change the type of aircraft that are needed to serve this market compared to what we've seen historically. So in particular, over the last 2 years, there have been two key developments in e-commerce. The first is the emergence of a direct-to-consumer model. This is a just-in-time inventory model as opposed to just-in-time delivery. And what that means is that increasingly e-commerce product is being shipped directly to a consumer around the world, directly from the factory in Asia or a warehouse in East Asia. So longer distance, higher payload needed. You cannot put e-commerce on a container ship the way maybe you would traditionally do, ship it by ocean and then put it in a regional warehouse. You need to get the product quickly from its origin to the final consumer. At the same time, we've seen a densification of e-commerce. Traditionally, there's the notion that e-commerce was a packaged cargo, maybe 6 or 7 pounds a cubic foot. We've seen increased densification of palletized e-commerce, up to 10 pounds per cubic foot. Large wide bodies are frequently flying out of Hong Kong and other East Asian hubs at max structural payload. That's a major, major change, and it's also a priority when you talk to some of the new e-commerce companies. It's one of their priorities is to densify their shipments, to make the most out of the capacity that they're paying for. And so what that means is there's an increasing need for large wide-body aircraft to service the e-commerce market. You need the long range, you need the high payload, and you need high density in a way that you didn't need before. And that's where Boeing's 777 family of freighters, the 777F and the 777-8F really excel at that kind of mission, offering the longest range in the industry, high payload capability, and also the highest densities in the industry around that 10 pound a cubic foot marker. Then once you bring e-commerce into your regional market, into Africa, say, that's where you're still going to need to have the traditional aircraft that were the backbone of the e-commerce distribution fleet, right? Medium wide bodies, standard body freighters, 37s, 67s, things of that nature, right? Those are the aircraft that are still going to be flying regionally to distribute the e-commerce from the regional hubs to the final consumer, and perhaps at a lower density once those pallets have been broken down. So.
Excellent. And I think, as you say, density is something that's evolved over the years. The old Amazon big box, and you open up and it was one pair of socks.
Right.
They realize they're paying for that space, that empty space. Yeah. Great. Thanks very much. So, Eric, you mentioned earlier partnerships.
Yep.
And Qatar Airways has taken strategic stakes in Rwandair, Airlink, others in the pipeline I was seeing online. I won't push you for who the others are. There's too many journalists in the audience.
Yeah.
Wake up, Ed. Wake up. Okay, no, he's awake. So I won't push you on the others. But the idea that you're bringing your global leadership into the continent to actually work with and help, what's behind that, and how do you see that benefiting the cargo community?
Yeah, it's a little bit of what I said earlier in the panel, where we can't fly everywhere where we need to be. It's too expensive. There's a lack of capital. It takes time. So partnerships are a much more efficient, faster way to serve a market. We are looking at partnerships more and more across the globe, including in Africa with Rwanda Air and Airlink, as you mentioned. But I think the approach that Qatar Airways is taking is a little different. Rather than leading commercially, we're looking more at the operational aspects of it. So we're known for providing a very high level of service. When we offer something to the market, it has to work. So we look at what are the operational sort of parameters that we can quickly grow and build so that when we offer it to our customers, it simply works. It's seamless. The customer will know that they can have a reliable solution. And I think that's a little bit differently than maybe the way it's traditionally built, which is looking at it more from a commercial perspective. Do you have capacity? What is the rate? Can we get an allocation? We really look at it more from a more fundamental posture, which is from the operational standpoint. And for us, that's been very successful. We also look at a more hub-to-hub type of aspect here, where we can actually flow business through a hub that's even more efficient than point-to-point flying. And that broadens the scope of what a customer, what a shipper is able to do with a single airline. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking.
Excellent. And I like, again, as you focus it from the eyes of the customer.
Yeah.
So Peter, actually, I'm going to also ask you a question related to the customer. A few years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago at a conference, had a wonderful presentation with yourself and your technology partner, Cargo Flash, where you were talking about looking at how your customers dealt with you from a digital perspective. And you said there were like 6, if I remember correctly, there were like 6 or 7 different tools that you were using, and that you'd actually looked at how can you simplify that to make it much easier for your customers. So how is it today in terms of the digital interactions with your customers? And are you really benefiting from this advancement that we've had in recent years of all these new digital platforms that are out there?
Yeah, so the digital excellence is a critical pillar of the KQ strategy. I will just mention that we have one project in incubation, which I don't have the privilege to mention it in this forum, but we have fantastic innovations in the pipeline where we're working with international giants, technology giants, to simplify our processes, provide the e-commerce solutions. Actually, KQ is in the middle of e-commerce innovative project. And the whole agenda is around the one order approach, simplify the process for the customer. In a one-stop shop, you're able to do your booking, you're able to confirm the offer, you're able to raise an invoice, and you're even able to pay on the spot. So we very much engaged in improvements around digital, including chatbots and all those kinds of solutions. But there is a part I cannot share within this forum, but this is digital excellence is really our next huge step in terms of customer experience. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Wilson, Peter used the word innovation. I have to ask you an innovation question because I always do. You've been at the front and center, the millions of tons that you handle and you process, and you go to your facilities and it's press a button and things move around and everybody knows where everything is, etc. Where do you see is the next big innovation that perhaps this continent can benefit from, or globally, whichever you prefer?
Sure. I'll keep my answer short. I think, yes, I think in terms of digitalization, I think that's definitely a trend. It is the ability of capturing information of whatever the cargo is within the terminal, and that to help you to make decisions on an operational level. I think that's point one. My second point relates to robotics. I think that is something which we are looking at certainly at Hactl, and I think with the difficulty of trying to get people into the industry, I think this is something which perhaps in some continents other than others is definitely something which we should look at. I think at Hactl we are blessed that we do have a dedicated team in terms of the performance enhancement team, which sole role is to look at the available technologies out there and to see how best to deliver a better, more efficient, more effective, and better customer service, but yet ensuring that it's safe, secure service to our customers. And that's something which will continue.
Excellent, I like that. So Grant, turning to you, you've again talking about service and operations. When I read the press, your growth plans are very ambitious. The number of freighters that you're getting on stream, depending on deliveries and others, and I won't talk about another manufacturer as well, etc. But, when it comes time for fleet planning, and you're very passionate, you talk about this continent, your continent, very proudly as a proud African, it must be quite a challenge now to try and say, look, how many of those new freighters will you be able to secure for this market? I know you're going to put in a strong case for it.
Facts. Look, yes, ambition-wise, it is in the news that we've ordered, and sorry to say, 10 A350 freighters from a counterpart, which comes into fruition in Q4 2026, inshallah. Looking at where to place it at this current stage, obviously we've got our current 5 777s operating, and how the contours, can we align it together? But the main focus is expanding into Africa. And we all know the reliance on supporting the Kenyan market is heavily influenced by the support in Johannesburg and South Africa, and that's still day and end. If the industry picks up within South Africa, yeah, we'll start an initiative to see how we can place these freighters into Africa. Expanding throughout Africa, we're starting to spiderweb, as we've announced, even with our passenger, even with the growth with Kenya, the Johannesburg. We need to obviously identify where those markets are. When does a market become saturated enough to say, okay, would the freighter rather be placed in Hong Kong? And we saw that previous year with the flowers. And this is something we're going to have to weigh up. But it's an exciting time for Etihad. To be honest, I enjoy the growth that Etihad has. We've got a great relationship with half of the customers here. Well, I'll use the 80-20 principle, 80% of the customers here. But our ambition is there. Our dedication to servicing untouched markets is there. My aspiration for Africa growth is there, and we'll maintain that.
Excellent. I think that's great. Now, Racheal, I'm going to save the last question to you about a subject which I know is very passionate to your heart, which is the next generation and young people. And I would actually encourage everybody, you will see some young people from Swissport over the next few days. Please take the time to talk to them. They are phenomenal. They attended our event last year when we had an event in Nairobi, and they were just a breath of fresh air. They were engaged, and they're all still with you in the team, which is a great sign for you, because we said one of the challenges is keeping the next generation engaged. So my question to you is, how have you been successful in terms of attracting that young people? And I think Grant talked about the fact we need to inspire them about what this industry does. So how did you do that? And then how have you retained them?
Thank you. And yes, indeed, this topic is very, very close to my heart. I think one of the things is creating awareness. I think in this part of the world, when you think about aviation, it's pilots, cabin crew. So it's just going there, out there, talking to college students, selling aviation, selling the fantastic opportunities in cargo, in engineering, so that at least then you're able to create that awareness. That is one. Two, I look at it from a space of where we've come from. Cargo, I think when I joined cargo about 19 years ago, a lot of paper. A lot of paper. I imagine today, we go to the warehouse and then you give a young generation paper, it doesn't sit too well with them. So how do we then think about them, how they want to work, and support them on that front? So a lot of solutions driven to keep them engaged. Handheld terminals at the warehouse, no more paper, no more clipboards. So at least then we are thinking about them. I think then lastly for me, I'd probably look at it from a space of engaging them. If there's one generation that is talented or super talented, is the next generation. All you need to do is go to social media and look at that content. And we owe it to them. We owe it to this industry. How do we bring in that potential to this industry?
Excellent. A great way to end the panel. So can I ask everybody to join me, please? Round of applause for these great panelists. Thank you all very much. I think they're going to want a photo. Come forward.
Beautiful. Absolutely amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, please put our hands together for this amazing panel discussion. Thank you very much. Racheal, Grant, thank you as well. Mr. Wilson, Kwong, Asante Sana, Peter Musola, thank you very much. Eric Wilson as well, Aaron Tayler, and of course, the single man, Glyn. Beautiful.